Welcome to Novara Live on an evening when Keir Starmer's days appear to be numbered. Morgan McSweeney is gone. The head of communications is gone. The head of Labour in Scotland has demanded he go. Can he hold on? We will also, in the second half of the show, be discussing how it seems as if the mainstream media, the Times in particular, are waking up to the idea that Epstein and Mossad may have had some connections, although was he a member or not, we'll discuss. And one of Prince Andrew's ex-girlfriends gives a car crash interview on LBC. With ex-girlfriends like these, who needs enemies? I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined tonight by Helena, aka No Justice MTG. You've been on the edge of your seat all weekend.
Oh my God, it's been an absolute riot. What a day. What a weekend to be a political commentator. I've been very much enjoying the Westminster psychodrama that, of course, many members of the public are probably pretty sick of. But I guess I am, of course, rationally self-interested like a good capitalist would be.
Yeah, it's a good week to be a political commentator. I would prefer to be a fly on the wall. I would love to be witnessing all of this close up. Before we get into tonight's stories, we just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who signed up to become a paid supporter over the past week. It's been a crazy news cycle. News stories breaking every single day. And with that, thousands more of you tuning in each night for rigorous, reliable reporting. Stories like these are fast-moving. It really is all thanks to our supporters that we have the capacity to be across them with depth and diligence, and we will continue to be. If you valued our coverage, please do consider signing up to become a monthly supporter. Anything from £1 a month really does have an impact. Head to novaramedia.com/support. Also, join us for the first Downstream IRL of the year, where Aaron Bastani will be sitting down with our very own Ash Sarkar for the London launch of her book, Minority Rule. That's on the 16th of February, 9:30, at the Theatre in Hackney. So that's a week today. Keir Starmer's premiership is teetering on the brink, and in a sign that it may collapse any moment, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar made this pronouncement earlier today.
This isn't easy, and it's not without pain, as I have a genuine friendship with Keir Starmer. But my first priority and my first loyalty is to my country, Scotland. And I am not willing to sacrifice Scotland's NHS, our schools, our communities, our towns, cities, villages and islands to a third decade of an SNP government. That's why the distraction needs to end and the leadership in Downing Street has to change. It is so obvious that we desperately need change in Scotland. And in 3 months' time, the opportunity to get rid of a failing SNP government is one that is too important to be missed. We cannot allow the failures at the heart of Downing Street to mean the failures continue here in Scotland. Because the election in May is not without consequence for the lives of Scots.
Anas Sarwar is referring to the Scottish parliamentary elections set to take place in May. Now, according to polling conducted in mid-January, the SNP was set to win the most seats across both Scotland's regional and constituency votes. Reform were in second in this polling, and Scottish Labour were already on track for their worst result in Scotland in 116 years, in third place, just on 15%, which is a disaster. And that was before the Epstein files were released. So Sarwar's party is likely to get a kicking. So you can see why he might be keen for Keir Starmer to go, because the association with Starmer is clearly bringing them down. Unfortunately, though, it does seem like this wasn't a brave politician standing up to a national leader because they have such principle that they can't bear to see the party's name get dragged through the mud, and that they want, someone with real values. This seems like opportunism, because Sarwar tweeted this last year. Now, this has been sort of picked up again today, tweeted a lot. April the 4th, 2025. It was great to catch up with my old friend and the UK's relatively new ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson. Now, if you are Anas Sarwar and you think Keir Starmer should go because of poor judgment, you can't say it's poor judgment because of stuff you learnt since he was made US ambassador. So obviously we've learnt more stuff about Peter Mandelson than we knew when he was made ambassador since he was made ambassador, which is that he was forwarding emails to Epstein. A few stuff about the depth of the relationships, but fundamentally, we all knew when he was appointed US ambassador that he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein after he had been convicted for child sex offences, child sex abuse. And that's why it was terrible judgment to appoint him then. All that information was available to Anas Sarwar when he shared that picture of him with Peter Mandelson saying what a great friend he was. I don't think he has a leg to stand on.
I agree, 100%. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. As you say, it seems to me like opportunism, and it's perfectly understandable given that Labour are looking at electoral oblivion in Holyrood coming third. I mean, it was enough in terms of the soul-searching that Labour were having to do in Scotland when they lost it the first time more broadly, and not even with the kind of level of crashing of support. I mean, Ed Miliband described it in the 2015 election as like a tidal wave of nationalism. And if under, what was admittedly the very charismatic leader of Nicola Sturgeon, they get beaten probably just as badly in Holyrood now under someone who, like John Swinney, is not exactly the most kind of riveting political figure, stands to reason that Anas Sarwar needs to find someone else to blame for Labour's poor fortunes in Scotland other than himself. And of course, if you want to make that first move, which he has essentially been in terms of large-scale Labour figures, to call for Starmer's resignation, when inevitably Holyrood elections go poorly for him, it's just like, well, no skin off my nose. I told you, Gav. Told you to go. I told you that it was all your fault. Even though clearly we have the receipts showing that he never really had as much concern over this stuff as he claims to have now, given his previous relationships with someone like Peter Mandelson. But I mean, they're going to come in third in Scotland. It's unheard of at this point. Although, unfortunately, to try and say that somehow it's the SNP's failing government he needs to challenge rather than getting the one in Westminster, I'm like, well, you look at all of the things that are in the media at the moment in terms of what people are sick of in this country. Water being polluted by private water companies, the extortionate amount people pay on student loans. Not a problem for Scottish people. They have nationalised water. They don't have to pay tuition fees. So to try and somehow say that, well, they need better leadership in Downing Street. And I'm like, well, that's the big problem with Labour's whole political positions that they've taken that the SNP clearly oppose. Is why young people overwhelmingly still vote SNP to this day.
It's a really crappy argument, actually, isn't it, that Anas Sarwar put forward? He's basically saying, look, I know that I was also friends with Peter Mandelson. I know that all the things you hate about Keir Starmer, I have in common as well. Like he is a sort of career politician on the right of the party. I mean, the picture of him with Mandelson, calling him an old friend, speaks for itself. But he's saying the danger of 4 more years of the SNP is such an existential threat that now the guy I kind of fundamentally agree with has to resign. Like, I thought he was going to say reform there, because then, it's often a weak argument, but you often hear Liberal politicians say, desperate times call for desperate measures, and reform would be, a fundamental threat to the social fabric of Scotland. That's what I was imagining he was going to say. But it's like the possibility of the SNP having 4 more years in government when they've been in government for ages and people don't seem to mind, and then their politics is particularly different from the Labour Party, just seems a bit silly to me. The condemnation from the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar came just hours after a second key aide quit Starmer's Downing Street team this morning. Tim Allen, not Tim Allen. Oh my God, if Tim Allen's left, the whole thing's going to collapse. He was, in fact, only appointed Director of Communications at Number 10 in September last year. So that's a very short tenure. And Allen's statement on leaving the job was equally brief. So he said this: I have decided to stand down to allow a new Number 10 team to be built. I wish the PM and his team every success. There's some insight into why he left in the FT write-up of his resignation. He's one of these people, I have to admit, I hadn't heard of before this morning, but I've read about him today, and this is what I found interesting from the reporting I read. So this is from the Financial Times. A person familiar with the matter said that Allen had even closer links to Mandelson than McSweeney did, and that this would become apparent with the promised disclosure of government messages to and from the former ambassador. They added that Allen was a very right-wing Labour person, ultra-Blairite, and so would be unlikely to support a leftward shift if Starmer were to change direction to save his premiership. After serving government in the New Labour years, Allen went on to found Portland Communications, which represented the governments of Qatar, Russia, and Kazakhstan, as well as multiple US tech giants. His connections to lobbying also continued while he was in government. So the FT report this. Allen not only founded Portland, but also maintained a minority stake in Strand Partners, another public affairs company. Strand has clients including the British Horse Racing Authority, OVO Energy, Cadent Gas, and Netflix. Allen also retained a minority stake in Thorndon Partners, which provides strategic communications services and says it works with some of the world's leading law firms. One person with knowledge of the situation said that officials were surprised when Allen was appointed that he was allowed to hold the role of communications director while retaining stakes in the companies. There is no suggestion that Allen broke any rules by maintaining the holdings. The person claimed that Allen had leaned heavily on the Mandelson precedent that it was okay to own shares in a lobbying company while serving in government. So the Mandelson precedent here was that it's okay to be in government and have loads of outside interests. Mandelson had a stake in Global Counsel while he was UK ambassador to the United States. Now, there may be a new Mandelson precedent, which is if it looks like you're using public office to enrich yourself, if it even looks like it, the public aren't going to like it. So my question here is why this guy was ever appointed in the first place. It doesn't, this giant of political communications has left and now it's all going to collapse. I think the fact that this guy was ever there in the first place shows you what you need to know about the Starmer government. I should say, unlike with Mandelson, where we sort of can see that he used, or it looks very much like he used his office to enrich himself, there is no evidence that Allen did that. It's just an impression that, to me, doesn't look like this should really be the head of communications for the Labour Party, frankly. Tim Allen's resignation today was, of course, really just the aftershock of the real story, which was on Sunday, and that was Morgan McSweeney resigning. So McSweeney, unlike Tim Allen, has been part of the Starmer project from the very beginning. He masterminded his rise to power, and McSweeney's statement was longer than Allen's. We're only going to show you one crucial part, though. The decision to appoint Peter Mandelson was wrong. He has damaged our party, our country, and trust in politics itself. When asked, I advised the Prime Minister to make that appointment, and I take full responsibility for that advice. In public life, responsibility must be owned when it matters most, not just when it is most convenient. In the circumstances, the only honourable course is to step aside. I think there it's that when asked is the key phrase there. So McSweeney's crime was to give bad advice when that advice was asked for by Keir Starmer. Now, it was obviously Keir Starmer who made the decision. Now, I said on last week's show, I think if an advisor gives bad advice on something very technical, then it is okay to blame the advisor. So if an advisor, if you've been asked sort of what should the marginal tax rate be, and how will that affect investment, or if I make this change to banking regulation, what will be the impact on which if there's a very technical issue which you've been given bad advice on, but you chose someone who was perfectly well qualified, I think that you can say that's the advisor's fault because the Prime Minister, it's not their job to be an expert on everything. If the advice is, should I hire someone who maintained a close relationship with a billionaire paedophile, that's not specialist knowledge. It doesn't require specialist knowledge. So I think the idea that this is Morgan McSweeney's fault, as much as I dislike Morgan McSweeney, doesn't seem particularly convincing to me.
I mean, in every other normal situation, I think I would agree, right? If this was any other prime minister who had any kind of political project to speak of, maybe I would agree. But this is Keir Starmer. This is somebody who, as far as I can see, believes in literally nothing. And from day one, this hasn't been a Keir Starmer project in which he hired McSweeney to help him. McSweeney was the driving force from the outset. He was the one who approached Keir Starmer, allegedly, and when he was the director of Labour Together, to say, you're our guy. We'd like you to potentially be the person we have to replace the Jeremy Corbyn era as our leader in the Labour Party, as the leader of the Labour right faction. So I understand where you're coming from. Ultimately, the buck does stop with the person who's actually been elected. But how did he get into this position in the first place? Well, it was through the McSweeney strategy in the background. Well, I mean, I say strategy, it was essentially just lies, right? Just tell the members of the Labour Party, we'll do all these things, we'll freedom of movement, we'll do all these nationalisations. Yeah, you'll vote for that. No, that was never going to happen. To try and make sure you get into the position to then create the reimagined image of the Labour Party that we keep being told that they've created. The media very, very, very specific in making sure everybody knows that they took them from the worst ever defeat to this huge victory between 2019 and 2024. And as far as I can see, all of the actual impetus from that came from Morgan McSweeney. And the statement says, well, when asked, I provided this advice. And I'm just like, well, you're always asked, because all of the things that Keir Starmer's done, as far as I can see, have come from the team surrounding him, the Politburo of people, whether it be McSweeney or Pat McFadden or Rachel Reeves, rather than from the mind of the Prime Minister himself. And that's what people around him also briefed the media. I mean, I was at Patrick Maguire speaking on Times Radio saying, oh, he's a man who delegates. He's a man who is surrounded by people giving him advice. And I'm like, well, it stands to reason, as far as I can see, if I'm trying to intuit what's happened here, that it's likely that, you know, as a protege of Peter Mandelson, McSweeney's put him forward proactively to me, to Keir Starmer, saying, wouldn't this be a good guy to have in our role in Washington, potentially because, as many people in the press have been saying, because of the links that he had to the kind of dirty people in the background of the Trump administration, dirty in a more colloquial sense, obviously, I'm not saying specifically anything that's been done outside of the relationships with Epstein, for example. And so Keir Starmer's just going, yeah, all right, I guess we'll go with it. Because people also told Keir Starmer, don't take that advice. Like Rayner has been reported apparently as saying that she was pretty vociferous in saying that he shouldn't appoint Peter Mandelson. And again, if you'd spent 5 minutes living in the normal world, which Angela Rayner has done, she spent most of her life living in the real world, it would be very obvious, well, don't appoint this guy, it's politically toxic. But all the people surrounding Keir Starmer are part of the political machine that ignores or doesn't understand the reality of what the optics would be like for this, because it's all part of the political parlor games of how do we reach out for these people in Washington? How do we get the people that we think would be in the most effective place that they could be, given what we know of the body politic, but not in the minds of the general public. And that looks to me like something that you'd see out of the mind of a political strategist, which clearly Keir Starmer is not. Clearly he isn't, because he's widely reported as having no actual party direction or policy direction, and only has been doing it because of the way he's been corralled into these positions by the Labour Together strategy from 2017 all the way till today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why lots of people are saying this is a very dangerous moment for Keir Starmer, because though Morgan McSweeney might have had a strategy we didn't like, and it doesn't seem to have gone particularly well, obviously the Prime Minister is the least popular Prime Minister ever, but he had a strategy, and Keir Starmer doesn't have that. So I think that's one of the reasons why he seemed very reluctant to let go of him for a while, because there's sort of nothing to replace him.
Well, Orville's empty. Well, who's going to be doing the ventriloquism for Orville now?
He's just made the two existing deputy chiefs of staff have now just become the co-chiefs of staff.
I guess let's get him WhatsApp
because
Morgan
he couldn't choose between them, so he just said make both the deputies the chief of staff. That's the process, isn't that the process? So yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing's going to be a disaster. Cabinet members, though, appear to be rallying around. The context here is that this evening there's a big meeting where Keir Starmer is going to speak to the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, and it had been reported that this was going to be very difficult for him. Maybe this would be some kind of crunch moment. And following the announcement from Anas Sarwar, and before that meeting, which will be happening this evening, Cabinet members have been sort of rallying round to all say how much they support Keir Starmer and how brilliant he is and how he should remain as Prime Minister. So we shall start with Rachel Reeves. I know you wanted to hear from her. Rebuilding Britain takes time, but thanks to the decisions we've made, NHS waiting lists are falling, inflation is falling, interest rates are falling. The conditions for the economy to grow are there. With Keir as our Prime Minister, we are turning the country around. Polling also falling. Popularity ratings falling, belief in the ability of politics to change things falling. Justice Secretary David Lammy also showed his support for the Prime Minister. So he posted this. Keir Starmer won a massive mandate 18 months ago for 5 years to deliver on Labour's manifesto that we all stood on. We should let nothing distract us from our mission to change Britain, and we support the Prime Minister in doing that. I don't think that's not a particularly outgoing one, is it? We should support the Prime Minister. That's a change of tune from Lammy. So briefings to The Telegraph over the weekend claimed that Lammy had warned Starmer about Mandelson and apparently had challenged the PM over the decision to appoint him. Of course, this is the kind of thing you want to be written about you in the weekend papers, so this could have been some self-serving briefing, but who knows. The tweets have been coming thick and fast, so after 24 hours of pretty much over the weekend, everyone was silent. Now, In the past couple of hours, every single member of the cabinet has posted a message of support, which will read in this rather sort of similar loveless tone. Clearly, they've been asked to do it. Liz Kendall and Bridget Phillipson have given TV interviews backing the Prime Minister. Support has also come from a less expected figure. So this is more significant than all these cabinet ministers sort of being marched out to say, actually, he should stay in the job. Angela Rayner has said he should stay in the job. So she says, the recent scandal around Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein was shocking and demands that both this government and our party learn the lessons and act on them. But the worst possible response would be to play party politics or factional games. Labour is only getting started on changing things for the better. Our Employment Rights Act, renters' rights, leasehold reform, free school meals and lifting kids out of poverty. I urge all my colleagues to come together, remember our values and put them into practice as a team. The Prime Minister has my full support in leading us to that end. Now, what's the significance of that? I don't think it means that Angela Rayner genuinely, likes Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and doesn't want to replace him as Prime Minister. But what it signifies is that she doesn't think that now is the time to bring him down. So it seems to me that there is a decision among potential competitors that either they don't want to be the first person to pull the trigger or they think they should bide their time a little bit longer. Obviously, there's going to be a by-election at the end of this month, which Labour might come third in. Maybe that would be the time when they pounce, or it could be after those May elections. Obviously, Angela Rayner, she's still waiting for the tax authorities to work out if she did underpay tax on a house in Brighton. Wes Streeting would probably like this to be as far in the past as possible for him to take his shot because he's very much associated with Mandelson. I suppose if all the files come out and he's not particularly implicated in WhatsApp messages to Peter Mandelson and someone else is, then he can say, actually, his hands are relatively clean. So they might not be in a rush. One of the more bizarre defences of the Prime Minister, though, has come from Labour MP Natalie Fleet.
The reason that I am out here now, as a victim myself, talking about the reasons that I believe that he should absolutely stay in post is because of the things that he is achieving. We've just never had a Prime Minister that cares as much about violence against women and girls that he does. If he ends up resigning, it will be the most ironic thing that he has spent his entire career fighting for people like me before he'd even met me. The empathy, the passion that he has for the 200 women that will be raped in the UK today, for historic victims like Virginia Giuffre and all of Epstein's victims. This is a man that cares deeply and is absolutely determined to use the full force of the state so that we can do everything we can to eradicate violence against women and girls.
Now, that was an argument I didn't expect to hear, which is that Keir Starmer shouldn't resign for having appointed Peter Mandelson, who was close to Jeffrey Epstein. And the reason he shouldn't is to honour the memory of Virginia Giuffre. Apparently, is what she would have wanted, maybe. Someone with a contrasting take to Natalie Fleet was Maurice Glassman. He's founder of Blue Labour, which is the socially conservative wing of the party.
New Labour may die. Will it take the Labour Party with it?
Well, that's what's vital. That's why I'm saying that there's a very beautiful tradition within Labour of mutual aid, of people having solidarity with each other. It's been one of the great miracles of our country. Not communist, not fascist. Labour was straight with the working class. We won the war. Ernest Bevin is a hero. So Labour has to, the government and the Labour Party has to repent and reject New Labour as an alien body that took over the party, and this is where it leads. Okay. Perversion and paedophilia.
So two different approaches there. One, Keir Starmer needs to stay because he's so tough on people like Jeffrey Epstein. And two, New Labour logically ends in paedophilia.
And perversion.
So two contrasting, not necessarily thoroughly thought through positions. I don't know. What do you think of both of them?
I mean, with the Natalie Fleet one to start with, I mean, again, I think your kind of incredulity at the kind of thing she was saying says it all, really. Insofar as, again, it's not just that he appointed Peter Mandelson given the knowledge of his links to Jeffrey Epstein, which he admitted in the Commons he was told before the appointment, right? Saying, oh, well, Mandelson lied about the state of their friendship. And I'm like, a lot of these things you could have just Googled. It wasn't exactly unknown information. There was a bit with when the first revelations were made about the birthday messages that Peter Mandelson left for Jeffrey Epstein. And there was a couple of days where Keir Starmer was saying, I have confidence in him, etc., etc. We won't be firing him. We won't be leaving. And that was at the time when victims of Jeffrey Epstein were publicly calling for Mandelson to be removed from post. And it was only until the Times the very next day dropped even more revelations about the kind of messages that Peter Mandelson had left for Jeffrey Epstein and more of the stuff about their relationship, that Keir Starmer then went out and got him to resign from his post, called him up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, well, if it was that concerning for you, Keir, if it was that much of a pressing issue that you had to wake up Peter Mandelson at the early hours of dawn, why did it take like multiple different drops from the Times? Again, these are all after the original revelations published in the JP Morgan Chase report and then reviewed by the FT in 2023, right? And after the first set of revelations from the birthday book, which had Peter Mandelson's messages in it. Like, I don't think you have any leg to stand on in terms of your apparent concern for the victims of violence against women and girls if their own statements trying to want you to get you to fire this guy that you've appointed aren't enough until extra revelations come out in the media. That, to me, I don't know about anybody else at home, doesn't scream concern. Again, unless I'm even underestimating the level to which he's just being guided outside of his control. And then, because I remember it was reported in some of the media that McSweeney was pleading with Starmer not to remove Mandelson even after those revelations were done. I'm like, well, who's driving the ship? We never quite know when it comes to the Labour Party at this point. But if you genuinely have this level of concern that she claims that Keir Starmer does about the victims of violence against women and girls, especially those who are victims of Jeffrey Epstein, then you would have immediately shut down anybody who said we need to keep this guy in post, especially after those people had made a statement. As for Lord Glassman, I'm like, well, you're also on the right wing of the party. I know Blue Labour are more socially conservative. Like, he always critiques New Labour for being globalist or whatever. And I'm like, well, neither of you actually kind of have these kind of broader socialist values of internationalism, right? Advancing the interests of global capital, which is what New Labour did, right? Peter Mandelson is kind of emblematic of the kind of people who made Labour so toxic to working class interests by wanting to win over middle class people. Like, was it the Mondeo Man was the strategy in 1997? I mean, Mandelson was famously the person who said working class people have nowhere else to go. Don't concern yourself with their interests, right? So we need to turn our party conference to be able to schmooze international business, to turn it into essentially a big lobbying gala for the world's wealthy and powerful, and to say you're unconcerned with wealth inequality. That's the kind of right-wing economics that Mandelson brought heavily into the Labour Party. Of course, there was at least a mandate for that in 97 because Blair had been elected as a Labour leader on that platform. He said, we're going to create a new Labour, and the members wanted to vote for it. It's not like Keir Starmer, who stood on a platform that then didn't materialise when it comes to McSweeney advising Starmer in that case, right? But when it comes to the economic issues, apart from the desire for an industrial strategy, which is one I share with Lord Glassman, is he actually meaningfully that different? If he's going to cozy up to people from the right wing of American politics, which he has links to, who also support the same kind of international capital that was supported by Mandelson, but he supports it in a more nationalistic way, right? It should be about trying to do things in the national interest rather than a global interest. I'm like, well, actually the left wing, the kind of bare bones socialist position is to have an international focus about the broader international working class rather than kind of more kind of vulgar national interests, right? And as for the claim that somehow New Labour leads to perversion, I'm like, well, I don't know if you have any clues as to why he's making the specific link between the kind of globalist interests, or
well, I think it's probably, and I don't know I don't know how he would expand on it, but it seems to me that it's an association of like elite paedophilia and social liberalism, which I think is a very toxic. Instead of blaming this on sort of grotesque wealth inequality and misogyny, saying this is because we've become too permissive as a society is
that's the thing,
how I would interpret that.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand. The thing is that the one thing that links together all the people in the Epstein files, bar none, is that they're rich. So they're wealthy and they're powerful, right? That is the common denominator that is throughout the Epstein files. Like gender, nationality, religion, all these kind of things, people from different backgrounds, they're all in the Epstein files, right? There's no one demographic that you can pinpoint that they all share, apart from power and wealth, because that's what capitalism rewards. It rewards people with power and wealth, and they get away with things that other people don't get away with. So, I guess that's a very, again, socially conservative view that social liberalism leads to the breakdown of the traditional order. But I don't see any evidence to suggest that is.
I mean, there was a lot of child abuse before social liberalism.
Well, yeah, very true, very true.
Let's go on to our next story, very much related. On the BBC on Sunday, Laura Kuenssberg pushed Cabinet Minister Pat McFadden on why Keir Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson as US ambassador, given that he knew he'd maintained a close relationship with a convicted paedophile. And Pat McFadden had a curious response.
A regular appearer on a Times podcast, part of the BBC's election coverage.
But this is about the Prime Minister's decision.
I don't know if you put these questions to Peter Mandelson about
Secretary of
Epstein
State,
when you interviewed him before this or not. Maybe you did, but quite a lot of people didn't.
This is about the Prime Minister of this country's judgment to hire him to one of the most high-profile jobs in the country. And of course, the benefit of hindsight can be 2020. But the Prime Minister's curiosity seems to have fallen way, way short here.
Well, I believe the Prime Minister will have asked about this relationship. It sounds to me, and I can't know until everything's published, that Peter Mandelson will have enormously diminished it, portrayed himself as some kind of victim of being duped, rather than what's been revealed in the exchanges that we've seen. And, you know, even when you look at the BBC's coverage of the day that Peter Mandelson was appointed as the Prime Minister, there is no mention on it of Jeffrey Epstein.
But this is about the Prime Minister's judgment.
There are, in fact, political opponents welcoming it. So the point I make this is not to say whataboutery or to point the finger at anyone else, but it is to make the point that at the time of the appointment, in many media circles, the issues of Jeffrey Epstein were not being raised.
This is about.
It's a good point. I mean, he's got a point there, right? I mean, it doesn't excuse the Labour Party, but the BBC didn't really raise it. Laura Kuenssberg has done many an interview with Peter Mandelson where she hasn't thought that Jeffrey Epstein was a particularly relevant thing to raise. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. So one, you know, Pat McFadden could be saying, look, this clearly wasn't a big issue. It clearly was reasonable to hire someone who had been a friend of a convicted paedophile for such an important role. And the proof of that is that the media didn't mention it, because the media is the arbiter of what is significant. Obviously, the other interpretation is that the media and the Labour Party are both rotten. Some people, of course, were curious about Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein long before the current email dump. One of them was Aaron Bastani. This is from January 2022. So long before Mandelson was appointed US ambassador. Shame on the BBC and any paper or network which interviews Peter Mandelson and doesn't ask about Jeffrey Epstein. That they don't, week after week, shows the moral decay at the heart of legacy media and Westminster politics. Disgusting. Now, obviously, if it had been Aaron Bastani interviewing Pat McFadden on Sunday, he wouldn't have been able to offer that riposte to Laura Kuenssberg, attempting some challenging questioning. Someone else who was on the ball on this was Rivka Brown, at the 2023 Labour Party conference.
Did you ride on the Lolita Express?
Do I what?
Did you ride on the Lolita Express? You didn't. You can confirm for the record. Why did Jeffrey Epstein call you Petey?
Look, lovely to talk to you, but I'm afraid I'm booked for...
Onto the Lolita Express.
Onto Times Radio, and they take precedence. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. I hope they ask you some very softball questions.
I hope so.
This is Aaron again in 2024. If Lord Mandelson is ever kind enough to grace the Novara Media Studios, we would, unlike the BBC, ask him about his friendship with the world's most famous paedophile. So this idea, you know, the first argument that Pat McFadden is making, that obviously this wasn't a big deal, otherwise people would have mentioned it. People were mentioning it. Maybe not Laura Kuenssberg, maybe not the Labour front bench, but there were plenty of people mentioning it. And it wasn't just people that worked in Novara Media. So one of the sort of legacy papers that sort of can stand tall, let's say, that hasn't been shown to be completely corrupt over the past week, is the Financial Times. So the paper interviewed Peter Mandelson in February last year. So that was just as he was made US ambassador. It was an interview with George Parker. This is from the article from February last year. We are on our way north on a high-speed Avanti train when I ask Mandelson about his relationship with Epstein. I regret ever meeting him or being introduced to him by his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, he says. I regret even more the hurt he caused to many young women. An icy chill descends in Carriage J. I'm not going into this. It's an FT obsession. And frankly, you can all fuck off, okay? So, I mean, George Parker looks better out of that exchange now. It was an FT obsession, a Novara media obsession. Maybe a few more people should have been obsessed.
I mean, clearly so. Clearly the public's imagination has been captured by this. I mean, Luke Trill from More in Common was saying that 95% of people they surveyed had heard of this issue. So it's clearly something that outside of the other political issues that may be categorised into the Westminster psychodrama that people don't care about, it's clear that the links between Mandelson and Epstein are of concern to the public. It's not just a case of things that only concern the Westminster class. It is also the case that people genuinely think that this reflects badly on the government, and it is widely known that it does. Speaking of the Financial Times, of course, it's Jim Pickard, their correspondent, who wrote the original piece detailing what they found in the JP Morgan report. It was released in 2019 for JP Morgan Chase, but the FT article was from 2023. He was the one who asked Keir Starmer about this in a press conference before the election. And he was interviewed about this by Sophie Rich on Sky News, specifically around questions that the mainstream media have to answer over this. So Farouk was like, it's uncomfortable, but we need to talk about how this went uncovered broadly within the lobby for so long. And Jim Pickard said on screen what I had been screaming in my head for years about this, but as someone who streams regularly, I watch a lot of things like Laura Kuenssberg, and they would have Peter Mandelson on multiple times on their panel to comment on the issues of the day with whichever representative from the government or the opposition they've got on. And I'm going like, why aren't you asking him about Jeffrey Epstein? Why aren't you asking him about the report from JP Morgan Chase? And that's what Jim Pickard was saying to Sophie Ridge, that he was spending his time shouting at his telly, going, this is a serious issue. Why is nobody commenting on this? Why is no one concerned with this? And it's, of course, because Mandelson is somebody who's good for access. He's good to be able to ensure that you have links to the administration, because he is somebody who had links with lots of people. That's what he was known for as a political actor. And again, those links ended up being his downfall in the end. Things reached an incredibly surreal nadir on this particular issue. Of course, the Times are people who have been rightly condemning the Prime Minister for this appointment, have said things about the relationship and dumped a lot of the information which was originally published by Bloomberg about the birthday card, the birthday messages. And I'm like, hang on a minute. Didn't the Times Radio have a podcast hosted by Peter Mandelson for like a year, which he only left because he was going to be the US ambassador? They had a bunch of those podcasters defending having Peter Mandelson on the podcast last week. Again, something else I watched on stream, and I was looking at my screen open-mouthed, going, well, now you're all trying to cover for the fact that up until literally a couple of weeks ago, or potentially even September, depending on how scrupulous these media organisations are, where these links were never properly scrutinised, and even when they were scrutinised, no one took stock of the fact that they'd allowed it to go unscrutinised for so long, that they had spent time trying to be in good graces of the kind of people that Mandelson represented. And again, his connections go so far. This can be a big problem for the Labour Party as well, because he seems to have links to everybody within the party. So he's just somebody who is now tarnishing a lot of other people's reputations just by osmosis. And that's, again, a broader problem with our political class. It's all a system of mutually assured destruction based upon mutual links with each other, and based upon the fact that if you do want to scrutinise somebody who potentially might be good copy for your newspaper, it might mean less stories down the line, and that is a material incentive not to report on it until, again, the very last minute, when suddenly these people's careers are in tatters and you don't actually need them for access anymore because they've been removed from public life.
If you're impressed at Rivka being on this ahead of the curve, asking Peter Mandelson these important questions in 2023 when he was still getting softball interviews from the likes of Laura Kuenssberg. You know what to do. You can sign up and support Novara Media at novaramedia.com/support. We do want to build this organisation to have more reporters on the beat so we can ask tough questions, which other people seem to just forget to do sometimes. They forget, they've got other things on their plate. And maybe he's hosting a podcast for their channel, for their radio station as well, who knows. Now, this is a headline you might not have expected to see in The Times. Was Epstein a Mossad agent? New files deepen mystery over Israeli links. Now, I'm pretty sure if a random Labour member had asked that question on Facebook in 2017 to their 100 friends, The Times would have splashed it on the front page of their paper as more evidence of sick anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and just more reason why Jeremy Corbyn should resign. But times have changed. Now these kind of questions can be asked in the paper of record. Even the mainstream is becoming a little more willing to think the unthinkable. So what was this article based on? Well, it references an FBI report included in the Epstein files. The report is from 2020, and it's an account of a briefing from a confidential human source, so in other words, an informant, who was secretly providing information to the FBI. And these are the key parts related to Israel. So you've got something that's redacted, and then it says Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, CHS, so that's the confidential human source, the informant, learned that Dershowitz influenced many students from wealthy families. For example, Josh Kushner and Jared Kushner were both his students. Dershowitz told the informant that if he were young again, he would be holding a stun gun as an Israeli intelligence Mossad agent. The informant believed Dershowitz was co-opted by Mossad and subscribed to their mission. CHS, the informant, still continues to communicate occasionally for Dershowitz. See previous reporting. Now, I'd love to see the previous reporting. And then the next point is where it gets onto Jeffrey Epstein. So they say Jeffrey Epstein was represented by Dershowitz. CHS, so the confidential human source, remembered Dershowitz tell Alex Acosta, the U.S. Attorney Southern District of Florida at the time, that Epstein belonged to both U.S. and Allied intelligence services. CHS shared phone calls between Dershowitz and Epstein during which she took notes. After these calls, Mossad would then call Dershowitz to debrief. Epstein was close to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and trained as a spy under him. Barak believed Netanyahu was a criminal. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates are allied against Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. One of CHS's, redacted, who presumably worked redacted, asked the informant a lot of questions about Epstein. CHS became convinced that Epstein was a co-opted Mossad agent. See previous reporting. It's pretty clear what this informant believed. Now, of course, it's not clear who the source is. One would presume they would have to be someone close to either Dershowitz or Epstein for the FBI to take them seriously. There's references here to sort of being part of a phone call and taking contemporaneous notes, so that would presumably give the person added legitimacy. That being said, their word should not be taken as gospel. This is sort of one person giving evidence. Maybe they've got a grudge. Maybe they're being led down the garden path on some sort of suspicion. But I mean, clearly this is interesting. So what about other possible evidence? Well, in the Times article, they mention Epstein's well-documented and very close relationship with former Israeli PM Ehud Barak. And the newly released emails make clear that Barak stayed at Epstein's Manhattan apartment on multiple occasions, right up to the year of his arrest in 2019. And we already knew from reporting by Dropsite News, more on that later, that Epstein helped Barak transition from defense minister into an international security consultant. So he linked him up with various governments who could become clients. So not actually dissimilar to the relationship between Epstein and Mandelson. Formed this very close relationship with a senior government minister. Barak was defense minister as well as prime minister. And then when they leave office, help them link up with either the private sector or other governments. Again, that doesn't prove a Mossad connection. There is reference to Mossad in the emails, though. So these are two of the emails where the agency is mentioned. So the first relates to David Boies, a lawyer who was representing Harvey Weinstein at the time, who was accused of hiring former Mossad agents to intimidate Weinstein's victims. So it's the lawyer, obviously Weinstein was being accused of multiple sex offenses. And then the lawyer, it was said, hired Mossad agents to help intimidate the victims. So this is an exchange from Jeffrey Epstein to Ehud Barak. November 2017. Did boys ask you to help obtain former Mossad agents to do dirty investigations? This is getting a lot of press. And then Barak clearly doesn't want to talk about this by email. Call me. I'm in Paris. And then Jeffrey Epstein responds, I tried, and then gives the number that he can be contacted on. The second exchange from the following year, it seems, I suppose, like more of a joke, an inside joke, but who knows how it should be read. This is from December 2018. From Ehud Barak. Hi, Jeff. Are you going to be in London on Thursday? Best, EB. And then Epstein replies, unfortunately not. You should make clear that I don't work for Mossad. Smiley face. Again, read of that what you will. The article also references what is probably the strongest circumstantial evidence relating Epstein to Mossad. And that's this man's. This is Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. He's a disgraced media tycoon, so he owned lots of British papers and then stole people's pensions. He was widely suspected of having connections to the Israeli intelligence agency. And after he mysteriously died, after falling from his yacht in 1991, his body was brought to Israel to be buried in Jerusalem's Mount of Olives. That's a graveyard reserved for Israel's elite servants. His funeral was attended by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, Israeli President Chaim Herzog, and at least 6 serving and former heads of Israeli intelligence. A lot of Mossad agents at that funeral. Investigative journalists Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon even referred to Maxwell as Israel's super spy, and that was in their book of the same name. And in that book, they claim that Maxwell engaged in operations on behalf of Mossad, but then threatened to blow the whistle unless officials agreed to pay back some of his enormous debts. So he got into all of these debts. He was stealing the pension fund from his companies, and it seems like he sort of thought, okay, desperate times, desperate measures. I'm going to say to Mossad, unless you help me pay my debts, I'm going to go public on our relationship. That was their theory. They claim Mossad killed him in response. Obviously, this is all sort of in the public domain. That book was published a while ago. What we've now learned in these emails is that Epstein may have been convinced, or at least he read the book, and he extensively quoted from the book in a 2018 email, again to a redacted recipient. So this is a quote from that book. Robert Maxwell threatened Mossad. He told them that unless they gave him £400 million to save his crumbling empire, he would expose all he had done for them. In that time, he had free access to Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street, Ronald Reagan's White House, to the Kremlin, and to the corridors of power throughout Europe. Maxwell passed on all the secrets he learned to Mossad in Tel Aviv. In turn, they tolerated his excesses, vanities, and an insatiable appetite for a luxurious lifestyle and women. He told his controllers who they should target and how they should do it. He appointed himself as Israel's unofficial ambassador to the Soviet bloc. Just to remind you, this is Jeffrey Epstein quoting a book about Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, Robert Maxwell. Now, on first reading, that email didn't scream to me that he actually worked for Mossad. Like he's read a book about Mossad and then is now quoting something to a person. So this doesn't seem like someone who has insider info on Mossad. Oh, by the way, the subject line for that was he was passed away. That's not from the book. So I suppose it does look like Epstein's convinced there. He's saying he was passed away and here's the evidence. However, this exchange from 2017 provides an interesting twist. So in 2017, the self-help author Deepak Chopra wrote this to Epstein. Come to Israel with us. Relax and have fun with interesting people. If you want to use a fake name, bring your girls. It will be fun to have you. Love. You know, this is an aside, but this is obviously sort of the grotesque nature of how these people email each other. Use a fake name, bring your girls. It will be fun. It's all very gross. Epstein's response, though, is perhaps more surprising. So he says, another location, I do not like Israel at all. And so this email, I don't like Israel at all, is being used by some to sort of suggest clearly he wasn't a Mossad agent. If he was a Mossad agent, why would he hate Israel? But I actually think the combination of him clearly at around the same times, this email is from 2017, the email sort of where he's quoting about Maxwell being killed, are somewhat contemporaneous. It seems to me like it could have been the case that Jeffrey Epstein was working for Israel to some degree, maybe, probably not as like an explicit Mossad agent, but maybe as an asset or whatever. And then he had realized sort of a bit late in the day what Mossad does if you cross them. And he was worried that he was going to have the same ending as Robert Maxwell. And so he didn't want to go to Israel because he had, at one point been working for Israel. Then something's gone on where he's crossed them. Maybe they weren't particularly happy with him getting caught for the whole child sex offense and stuff. Maybe they thought that, was putting them at risk. Maybe they'd fallen out, and then he didn't want to go to Israel because he didn't want to end the same way that Robert Maxwell did. That is speculative, completely speculative, but I also don't think it's crazy, which is the standard I set for myself. Right. Sorry, let's go on. The Times quoted Lynette Nussbacher, I probably pronounced that wrong, a former British Army intelligence officer and lecturer in war studies at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. So she said this is a military expert, this is who they quoted. Every intelligence agency has people who work for the agency who are on salary, who have their pension paid for by the agency. We call them officers. Then there are people whose officers influence them to do work for their agency, sometimes paid, sometimes manipulated, sometimes blackmailed. They're called agents. And then there are people who are assets. They are just useful. Is it possible that Epstein was an asset to the Mossad? Yes. Do I think he was an agent of any intelligence agency? I think it was unlikely. Was he an officer? No. So she's saying it is plausible, possible that he was an asset, though not someone sort of directly working for Mossad, which seems plausible to me. Someone I trust on this, who's done a lot more research on the relationship between Epstein and Israel than I have, is Murtaza Hussain from Dropsite. He's written extensively on Epstein's connections, especially to Ehud Barak. And I just wanted to show you a short clip, which was from the interview I did with him in November last year.
It's very clear that he had more influence and power than many powerful government officials around the world. If you look at these emails between himself and Barak, at this time when 2012, 2013, when Barak was still one of the most powerful, influential people in the Israeli security establishment and political establishment, there's a clear power dynamic in those emails. It was not that Epstein was seeking out Barak's attention or trying to get a hold of Barak per se. It was really inverted. Barak was somebody who was eager for Epstein's attention, eager to work with Epstein, anxious to be in his good books and so forth. So, it certainly wasn't like Epstein was working for Mossad or something like that. He was far more powerful than that. He was somebody who people who were working for Israeli intelligence, like Barak, continued to do throughout his career and throughout his life. They were looking for Epstein's help. So Epstein was somebody who had leverage over all these people. He was seen as someone more powerful than them. If I were to speculate, very conservatively, he was somebody who clearly had the ability to make individuals very wealthy if they were connected to him, if they were in his good books. So that could give him a sense of leverage over them. Also, this is not noted in his emails and it's not noted in his official schedules, but we know that he was heavily involved in global sex trafficking of minors to other elites. So one can only imagine what sort of leverage that may have also afforded him.
Helena, I don't know where you stand on this question. Mossad agent or not? I suppose there's also the point that it's interesting that this is now being picked up in newspapers like The Times.
At least, I even saw Tim Stanley on the Telegraph's Daily Tea podcast say, why is nobody talking about the Israel connection here? Which I thought was very illuminating. In fact, I think Tim Stanley in the last kind of year or so has really kind of changed around what I thought of his journalism. I think he's been very interesting to cover as someone's very candid about conservative politics. That's a story for another time. But if even he on the Telegraph are talking about this, then clearly these links are much greater than what was being reported previously. Remember, we was all talking about how they were talking about these Russia links, but no one was mentioning the Israel links. Now the tide on that beginning to turn, which is interesting. I think, in my own opinion, from the information that we have right now, I think I probably closely align with what Lynette Nussbacher was saying specifically. I think she's right in her assessment of this, insofar as could he possibly have been an asset? It looks quite likely. It looks quite likely to give the links to all the powerful people that he's got. Whether that is in a position of power where they're looking for his advice or whether he's looking for them or whether it's vice versa or whatever it is, I think that that's what the information that we have from these files certainly shows. Do we know that he was sympathetic to Israel? Absolutely. Not just in terms of his personal agreements with people from the country or from high-profile people from the country, but the mission of the country. Right? He was the guy who donated to the IDF, lots of money to the IDF. He even donated to the charity which puts the most amount of money, or puts lots of money into settlements, into actually funding illegal settlements in the West Bank. So this is somebody who has really close ties to the project that Israel represents, even if he's not directly being related to the Mossad necessarily, right? Whether he's someone who's a person of interest, who has these links to powerful people, and who may have done things that they had similar interests as, right? There's a difference between someone doing something because they've been told to, and converging interests based upon shared ideologies or shared values or on shared positions, which may be the case. It may be the case that just happens to dovetail into each other because, of course, we see from the cozy little chats between Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein. Barak was the one who got him onto Palantir. These links between powerful companies and powerful people, and this, I guess that's a very kind of military-based relationship between not only Palantir and Israel, but I think between Palantir, Israel, and the United States, and indeed potentially the United Kingdom, but given the fact that Palantir have contracts with us now as well. So those are all converging interests. Does he have to be on the books as a paid agent for that to be important, for Israel to be important for the Mossad? Clearly not. Clearly that doesn't have to be a direct relationship rather than a causal or casual relationship. But it all does look extremely fishy. Although I will say, when it comes to the thing saying, I don't like Israel at all, you may be scared of going there in case they would hold him up for the things that he'd potentially double-cross them for. I mean, well, Israel have shown they're very happy to assassinate people in other countries as well. Like Atef Sieso was assassinated in Paris for being a member of the PLO. So I don't think it is necessarily past Israel's remit to engage in reprisals against their state enemies, whether they're on Israeli territory or not. Of course, I mean, whether that coming to Jeffrey Epstein's mind at the time of go, need to stay away from Israel for reprisals, of course, that remains to be seen. But
well, I mean, even if you think they could take you out in another part of the world, it's presumably easier for them to take you out in Israel, right?
True.
So he may not have thought, I'll be safe in a New York prison, where he did die in suspicious circumstances. So he didn't need to think that he was safe outside of Israel to think that there was an increased threat inside Israel. So I could see, to me, it seems unlikely that he just suddenly changed his mind, where like his whole life he'd been really pro-Israel, donating to the IDF, yada, yada, yada. And then suddenly he's like, actually, I hate Israel. It seems to me that probably if he doesn't want to go to Israel, there is a reason beyond he's just sort of lost the taste for it.
That's true. You don't turn heel on an entire political project that you've self-financed, and not just self-financed kind of casually, right? There are charities that support, civil society in Israel, which people donate to it. It's not a big deal. But donating to a charity that funds settlements, right, illegal settlements in the West Bank, shows that your connections to Israel are a deal greater than just, I like this country because it's the Jewish homeland or whatever. It's the project of colonization that he's directly funding with his own money there, which is a much closer link than most kind of casual Israel fans, I guess you'd call them at this point, would have, other than that.
Yeah, I don't think he'd just gone. I actually feel, even though I sort of made this connection in the last 2 hours, I feel now quite confident that Jeffrey Epstein was too scared to go to Israel in 2017, and that's very interesting.
I've not heard the name Lynette Nussbacher in a while. She was one of the experts that they hired to talk about military strategy on the BBC show Time Commanders, if you remember that one.
Fantastic.
Which, although that used to be hosted by Greg Wallace, though, so best a little less said about the better.
I suppose the Israel part of the narrative that I always found, I suppose, attractive in terms of sort of parsimony was the money side, because the big gap in the sort of whole story with Epstein, it was always quite clear to me how he made these elite friends, right? He was charismatic. He could provide nerdy guys with sexy parties that they might not get otherwise invited to, right? He made them feel like hot and sexy as well as smart. Right, these are kind of nerdy people who got to feel like jocks for a while, but he could only do that because he had loads of money. Also, he could bring very interesting people, some of whom he brought because he was sort of providing their institutions with money. So all of these brilliant academics come because he's rich, and the hole in the story was always, so how did he become so rich that he could lavish this much money on people who are already rich? Because to seem rich around Bill Gates, you need a real lot of money. Like you could, if you have a couple mil, you can seem rich around like ordinary Tom, Dick, and Harry. But if you're hanging out in those circles and people see you to be rich as someone who can provide them with money. You had to be really, really goddamn rich. And I think there was not a good enough explanation as to where that money came from. I think why the drop site news articles were interesting to me, and why that conversation with Murtaza Hussain was interesting to me, is because basically they're saying the money came from money laundering, essentially. So he could help if you wanted to hide money or move illicit money from government to government, or sort of from dodgy investor to dodgy investor, or dodgy investors to government, vice versa, arms trade, whatever, then you wouldn't go to a normal bank. You'd go to a sort of well-connected international person who's willing to break the law, and that Jeffrey Epstein was that person. And also, when it comes to illicit finance and money laundering, you can take a much bigger cut than official finance because you're taking a bigger risk. And so that's where the money came from. So that is... If that solves the money problem, then I'm less convinced he was paid by the Israelis. So to the extent that that's where the money comes from, I'm less convinced that he was getting paid by the Israelis. But he was clearly had a strong relationship with the Israelis, and I think for a while it was positive, and then it turned negative. And he was scared.
Quite a theory.
Quite a theory. Helena, let's wrap it up there. We will save Andrew's ex-girlfriend for either tomorrow or Wednesday. So do stay tuned for that. Of course, who knows what will happen between now and then. Helena, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Well, fingers crossed for another news week, which nothing happens, no news to report on at all, just like we've had the last few weeks.
Yeah, I'm sure. We can all relax from now. What did you say when you came into the room today? Are you enjoying the quiet?
Oh, yeah. Yes, nice, isn't it, the quiet? It's nice having the adults back in the room for once. The chaos, the Tory chaos has been ended.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.